EdTech Mondays Kenya is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with EdTech East Africa.
Welcome to this edition of EdTech Mondays Kenya. We are coming to you from our studio with an insightful conversation lined up. Now, when schools closed during the COVID-19 pandemic, millions of Kenyan learners were forced out of classrooms and back home, exposing just how critical parents and caregivers are to education. Yet, many families, especially in rural and marginalized communities today, face barriers such as low literacy, limited learning resources, economic pressures, and language challenges. The Keep Kenya Learning Initiative emerged to address these gaps, exploring how parents, schools, communities, and technology can work together to support learning beyond the classroom. So in this episode of EdTech Mondays Kenya, we examine what meaningful parental engagement looks like and the key lessons that the Keep Kenya Learning Initiative has revealed about supporting learning at home. Thank you all for joining us on this edition. I'm your host, Ian Wafula. In studio, I'm joined by Ng'ang'a Kibandi, who's the Partnerships and Advocacy Director at Dignitas, and also his colleague, Gikandi, who's the Research and Development Manager at Dignitas, and then someone we work very closely on this show, that is Ciku Mbugua, who's the Chief Executive Officer at EdTech East Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to break a bit of protocol and say gentlemen first in this situation. Ng'ang'a, tell us a bit about the Keep Kenya Learning Initiative in terms of who did it bring together and how was it operating?
Thank you, Ian. So Keep Kenya Learning brought interested, committed organizations, EdTech East Africa, Metis, Rally members, Dignitas, just around the COVID season or just after the COVID season. And the main concern was how learners or children were being engaged during the disruptions. And collectively, we sat to just think through what could we put together that would allow learning to continue taking place, and not necessarily formal learning, but even non-formal learning. But most importantly, how we could keep parents and caregivers very concerned and involved in the lives of their children during this break.
Yeah, and obviously, Nancy, this is where you're mostly involved when it comes to the research and identifying the gaps. Could you tell us some of the specific ones?
So you notice that the biggest gap is often literacy level. So you find that caregivers feel that they're not empowered. They don't even know how to interpret the competency-based education. And with the CBE, you realize that there was a major shift in how the role of the parent was envisioned. But then they still feel they don't have the skills to support. They don't understand the content when the child comes back with all the assignments that they need to support. But then there is also a major challenge, which is usually kind of the biggest barrier, because the parent is navigating between the hard economic times. So there's economic pressures, and then there's the ask to support the children at home. So navigating that and picking and balancing also becomes such a hard choice for them to make. Yeah.
And Ciku, let me bring you in on this, because I know you're also quite passionate as a parent yourself. Why then do you think that parental engagement is often overlooked in these conversations?
I think it's because we assume that the parent has no role to play beyond paying school fees, right? We don't involve them in conversations unless it's conversations to ask for some funds to do something in the school.
Thanks, Ciku. And for the purposes of this conversation, KKL is the Keep Kenya Learning. I know they're going to be referring to it quite a lot. Ng'ang'a, let me ask you the same question, because from a partnerships perspective, the first partners that you work with are the parents. Why then do you think they're left out from your experience?
I think it's how we perceive parenting. It's not just the duty to provide, it's also the duty to follow up and monitor progress, especially with your children. And KKL as an initiative, the expectation is that we don't expect parents to become teachers. What we are expecting of parents is to take an interest in what does the day of your child look like? What kind of opportunities do you present to them that allow them to continue to grow, to learn? And even in the resources that we've developed over the years and tested, one of the things we're very open to is not really the formal bits, but the non-formal bits, because there's a lot we could teach our children that has been carried from one generation to the next. And we learned that with the second sprint, where we were testing in a very traditional rural setting, where the levels of literacy are quite low, but then the parents have a wealth of knowledge, especially of traditions, of cultures, of just things that they do within the dynamics of that context. And it was really nice to see that. And I think just like this sitting, men are often left out. And in this particular one, we were very intentional to make sure that male caregivers also had a role to play.
So in the context of the KKL initiative or Keep Kenya Learning initiative, what are some of the exact strategies that you kind of employed to ensure that caregivers were involved?
One of the key things is a routine. One of the things we've learned over time is routines are very important, especially where children are concerned, not only during disruptions, but even their day-to-day when they go to school. What before school and after school looks like is really needs to be well structured. And it's not just about learning, it's also looking to the social emotional well-being. And we tested two things with this particular phase. The first phase, we went in with a routine that we had kind of adapted from the first phase. And we quickly realized maybe we needed to do that differently. And the second phase, we got the parents to create their routines. And it was really nice to see how the routines just varied. The parents who started off with learning in the morning, there are those who scheduled it for the afternoon. But it was interesting that even times to really bond, pray together, think about the day together, eat together, became a priority. And as I said, the intention here was a male caregiver. There was a place for them in that routine.
And Nancy, from the program perspective and design approach, what lessons were you learning, especially given that the program was happening in the context where some parents faced literacy challenges, livelihood, as well as language barriers. So what did you learn about designing engagement approaches that are realistic to these challenges or these realities?
The one thing that they really pushed back on was how we constantly think we know what education means to them. And it doesn't mean the same thing it means to all of us. What they said is education, it needs to fit into their culture, into their way of life. We are not telling them that you need to move away from this pastoralism. We are telling them that you can support education within the same. The other thing that we learned is technology has to be really low tech or even not there at all, because again, in the arid and semi-arid that we tested, you find that only like 40% had even access to radio, and like 60% did not have any of those resources we are looking for. The technology, internet, all that was not available. So it's also the humans just connecting together and taking advantage of any meetings or any like chief barazas where maybe we have different male caregivers who are meeting, or different chamas where women are also meeting, to leverage those so that they can continue engaging and learning from each other. So that was also what we learned.
Yeah. And Ciku, back to your point that caregivers are actually the first point of contact when it comes to learning and learning outcomes. One of the recurring themes in the program has been the caregiver well-being and their mental health. So why is emotional well-being so closely connected to learning outcomes?
I think the parent is the one that has most contact with it. Well, let me call it the most intimate contact, because maybe in terms of hours, it's actually the teacher, right? Because you take your child to school by 8 o'clock. But there's an intimacy with the parent and a child, even psychologically. If a parent is struggling mentally, the children will pick it up. Even if the parent is cognizant enough not to let it spill over in how they're speaking to or disciplining their child, the parent will definitely pick it up. A household where people are shouting or, all of the different symptoms or consequences of mental well-being, that house becomes a difficult nurturing space for the child. And obviously, these children will transfer that to the classroom setting. And if I'm in school worried about the fact that this morning my mom did not look okay and I found her crying, I'm not going to listen to what the teacher is saying. And I think we've missed a lot of that. We've missed opportunities to really check in on the parent. And I know that, there are structures within the community. One of the things I liked about the organization that Ng'ang'a is speaking about is they're so close to these parents. They do regular check-ins on many other things. They understand that for a parent to support their child, they need adequate support. But unfortunately, even our communities these days, just maybe because of urbanization and other things, we don't offer each other support systems. So how do we make sure that now that this is a fundamental building block for our education system, how do we make sure we're also looking at mental well-being of our parents?
Yeah, and on that note then, what role did technology and media platforms kind of address this gap and actually bring parents and schools together? Yeah.
I think EdTech Mondays is one such attempt by EdTech East Africa to do this. We want to deliberately create spaces where parents can go for specific information regarding their children. And of course, we also use our socials. During the first KKL, we used SMSs to prompt parents. Initially, we thought it would just be like a reminder of, okay, maybe this is a good time to check in. Have you done XYZ as had been agreed? But what ended up happening is it became a support system it also became a mechanism for us to check in. Are you all okay today? Because it was also an interesting time, right? Everybody, children and parents were home from school. The parents were worried about their ability to provide. So we used some of those mechanisms. Nancy said, though, that the reality is, especially when you're working or trying to support parents in rural areas, low tech is the way to go. Yeah.
And yeah, even though low tech is the way to go, the world is actually moving very heavy towards tech. And Ng'ang'a, I'm bringing in on this. How then can EdTech solutions actually better caregivers, even though with this context where in some cases low tech is the way to go, but the world is moving and it's moving fast?
Not all of us have TVs. This is more of an urban privilege. The context we're talking about, when we think media, they think of that small radio that they move around with. And I think for us, and the next phase of this is really looking at how do we take this to a more marginalized context. The refugee setting is something we're looking into. And the local radio then becomes the main resource. So the big question is, how do we break this down in a way that it's consumable by yet another consumer who may not have access to what you and I have in terms of the tech, the phones we have, in terms of the tablets, in terms of the televisions. How do we break this down to the radio piece? And you're very right, things are moving and moving really, really fast. And we need to adapt. So it almost feels like we need to sell the same vision. So regardless of a parent, regardless of a caregiver in your context, there is a role for you. So how do we break that down into bite-sized kind of information that gets to even that very left behind? I think in the urban context, we can do a lot more campaigns on how parents can get involved, and not necessarily just reminding them that your parents, your caregivers, we expect you to do something. The how to, I think, is the big gap we really need to come in and figure out how do we come in. And the personas vary. In an urban context, your parent leaves home at 5 a.m., it's probably back at 9 p.m. in the night. How do they come in? Where do they fit in that particular, they have limited time. How do they check in? What can they do? And technology could be one way of doing it. All of us have cameras in our houses. You can be able to monitor what your children are doing. You can be able to make that call and say, I can see you're not doing your homework or you're not doing what you're expected to be doing at this hour.
Yeah. Nancy, let me bring you back because you talked about the importance of involving the community. Can you just emphasize about localization and the kind of approach that you would do to make this a success?
So how we approached this is one, working with a local NGO, right? So we worked with a community-based organization, FCDO, but then it's allowing the community to create what they feel they would value and also would make more sense to them. And so for us, we facilitate. So being the facilitator as the outsider, but then leveraging the skills and strengths that they do have to come up with something that would be more meaningful to them. And so we, at the very beginning, sprint one, we designed a routine. It was a daily routine. So it was prescriptive to just see how they take it up. And what some of the households did, they modified it because they realized that would not work for them. We also learned that, you can't take something that you think will work and then obviously on the ground things are different, so it won't work for them. And then for the second sprint, we decided to work with the holiday routine, and it was to be used as a proxy for disruption because then the children are at home and we allowed them to design it. So all we gave was an example, and the example is not what was actually utilized. The timestamps, everything was made different. The activities also different. So that to say that the community knows best. They know how they live. They know their culture. They know what will work for them. They know what education means to them. They know what meaningful parental engagement looks like to them, and they're best placed to do that. So it's empowering them to be able to create for themselves.
Is it a tricky balance between balancing the realities of the community as well as sticking to curriculum and ensuring that the child is actually benefiting from both?
Yeah, it's constantly, that's a tension all the time. And even looking at and Ciku, I think, talked about this, you find that parental engagement is often misinterpreted to, it's attending the academic days, it is paying school fees, it is buying resources, which I know all parents can complain about right now. But it's been reduced to that, and that really is not meaningful engagement. It is supporting well, but it's not meaningful engagement. And so we constantly even think we have the solutions. Like now we have the PE guidelines, but do even schools know how to translate that so that the parent can be adequately empowered? But they are there, they're available, but the question is, do they even know how to translate them in a way that parents receive? So it's that misinterpretation of what meaningful engagement is, and that needs to balance the contextual realities as well as what the curriculum demands, but also the informal aspect of learning. It's often overlooked, and you find that the parent is the one who will teach values to these children, and they will teach while they are doing something else. They are probably cooking, they are probably sitting somewhere outside enjoying a good fire. But then do we remind parents that you can actually take advantage of that moment to be a learning moment? Yeah.
How can education programs better integrate psychological support, safeguarding into parental engagement efforts?
I think number one is acknowledging that parents are not a bystander, but they're a key pillar, and treating them as such. We invest a lot in how we support our teachers, in how we support our institutional leaders. Dignitas does a lot of work around coaching. I've not heard them talking about coaching parents. But there are institutions that are set up for that. The National Parents Association, which is across all counties and in all sub-counties, does the work to ensure that they're engaging the parents meaningfully, especially in this season when we're all trying to understand CBE. Maybe what we need to look at is what their curriculum and support looks like. How can we build it up so that it also becomes a moment for them to check in on the socio-emotional wellness of the parents, and also guide the parents on how to identify some of these issues with their learners and either raise them. If you're not able to address them, are you able to raise them into schools? I think that's one. Empowering the institutions that already exist, like National Parents Association, but then also strengthening the bonds between the school and home.
Yeah. And Ng'ang'a, and maybe we can shift gears a bit, because we've been very much heavy on the parental and caregiver side. In the context of KKL, how was it for the learners with the experience?
There's been a lot of appreciation. Trying to remember a quote verbatim from one of the learners, but it kind of spoke to, they really appreciated that they were spending time with their parents. It's something we take for granted, but they were actually spending time doing things together. It's not that they were just sitting idle. Even if a mother was cooking with their children, they were doing it together. It's not a mere instruction of, I want to find food ready. It's come to the kitchen, let's do it together. It was a case of a father going herding with their children. And an appreciation of, I spent the day, I learned something. And I think one of the things we have observed, both because the initial phase was really strongly in the informal settlements here in Nairobi, but also in a few of the cities out of Nairobi. Even when we took this to a rural setting, there was still that appreciation of presence. So it wasn't really what they learned, it's you were present. It's you took time to start off the day with me, you took time to end the day with me. So not really that they were taught. And I think that for me is a big plus.
Nancy, in the context of also like learners still, were they finding it different learning from their parents, given that the mentality one would assume is that I'm not supposed to be learning this from my parent, but actually it's the teacher who's supposed to be telling me what to do in school? It's
not learning like the way we are used to learning. It's an activity. So it's activity-based. So they're going to be doing their house chores, and they're probably going to be teaching to count, right? Because that's what they would tell us. That's how they teach them at home. But then it's based on what the learners received. It was more of the presence and the fact that they're having conversations. So they viewed them as more of conversations. And that's why they talked about how I became more disciplined. I became more disciplined in terms of how I would carry out on with my day. So you find that the fact that there's a routine, they're waking up, they're doing the house chore that's supposed to be done, they probably shower, prepare to go to school. So that in itself allowed them to be more disciplined. But the children themselves, based on the few that we spoke to, they appreciated the moments that they shared with these parents. And one of the parents actually said that they found the learner to be more, they were able to read more compared to before. But then it's not the parent who is teaching. In this case, when it comes to formal learning, it is the resources that are available that the child is engaging with. Because again, as Ciku was saying, we don't want parents to be the teachers. They're not replacing the teacher, but intentionally creating that time for them to engage with whatever resources around, whether technology or whether the books that they carry.
From your perspective, what are the three biggest things that Kenya still misunderstands about parental engagement? So I'd like three, at least one from each of you. I'll start with you, Ng'ang'a.
My first one is where education and the parent come in, there's still a misunderstanding of what are your roles, your responsibilities, and your duties. I think those three need to be differentiated for the parent, but also a very strong understanding that we are one team. At the end of the day, there's a teacher, there's the parent, there's a school. We all have the same interest, which is in the learner.
Yeah. What about you, for you, Ciku, the one thing that you think is highly misunderstood when it comes to parental engagement?
That formal learning is more important than the informal learning that the parents do at home every day. I think that's the most misunderstood.
Okay, straight and precise. What about you, Nancy?
That all the parents understand education the same way, understand what engagement is the same way, and have the same personas. That's totally misunderstood. Parents vary.
Yeah.
So, Ng'ang'a, back to you in the context of the conversation that we've just had today. Quite insightful, actually. What's your final word?
I think my final word is the sprints we are discussing have really been at a small scale. And what we're doing is different tests. And we are cognizant that at this stage, we need to make this a much bigger conversation in connecting the dots, especially between what already exists as resources, for example, from KICD, the school context, and the parental context. We need to join those three dots so that we are working towards the same objective together and we're complementing each other. So one, we need to scale this and we need a lot more stakeholders to come on board and have very pragmatic conversations on how we do that. And then I think my very last one is we need to be alive that there is still a huge majority that are being left out of this conversation. How do we bring them on board? And for that reason, we actually need more local-based organizations on board because they understand the context way better. But also, this is not just an initiative by non-governmental organizations. The government is a key stakeholder. We come in to complement them.
All right, Nancy, and then we finish off with Ciku.
The parents for the longest time are treated to be sort of like a secondary actor, right? But if you look at the triangle, we have the teacher, the parents, and the learner. So they need to be treated as such. And even with the different challenges that we know, the literacy levels, Keep Kenya Learning has taught us that the parents actually are a very good resource, even with those different levels that we see. But then closing the gap between the parent and the school is also very important because the school also has the responsibility to engage these parents more meaningfully and even looking at sustainability also within the context. The school can play such a big role in empowering these parents so that at least they do understand what meaningful engagement is. And so we need to make sure that that alignment is also there.
All right, Ciku, you have our last word.
I think our education system needs to consider our diversity. We have different contexts, we have different cultures, we have different belief systems. Right now, with CBE, we have a really good opportunity to contextualize. Why should a parent in Turkana be interested in engaging in their child's learning if it doesn't translate to them being able to keep their way of life today? because you're not trying to get them to stop being pastoralists, but education can help them be able to do it more sustainably today. How does every community in this country see themselves in the education system so that we're not building things that are so fragmented? We're all building cohesively, understanding and appreciating our uniqueness, but understanding that it's in the amplifying of our uniqueness that we all come together and build something beautiful in this country. We will talk about supporting parental engagement. Government, especially KICD, is doing a lot. National Parents Association is doing a lot. But until we get to the point where we make the parent a willing participant in this process, meaning they can see themselves, they can see their future, they can see the future of their children in what we are pushing. Which means let's talk. Ng'ang'a said it before. Let's use as many forums as possible. This is just one of them. Let's see even how to take this conversation lower to some of our more vernacular radio stations and community barazas and all of that. And I think this is the prime time, because as a country, I feel like we've also become more cognizant of the importance of education. And so it's on each of us as parents, as stakeholders, to help build and shape a CBE that will work for all of our children.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy, Ng'ang'a, and Ciku. That was quite insightful. That's it for this edition of EdTech Mondays Kenya. Remember to follow us on social media using the hashtag EdTech Mondays just to share your thoughts, and we keep the conversation going. Special thanks to our sign language interpreter, Miss Rose Omolo. My name is Ian Wafula. Until next time, goodbye.
EdTech Mondays Kenya is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in partnership with EdTech East Africa.